Okay, hello, and welcome to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic. Crazy! Today we'll be talking about the pilot episodes, so episodes 1 and 2, titled Welcome to Chaotic and Welcome to Chaotic Part 2. Crazy! So grab a snack, start your laundry, and let's dive right in. Let me tell you a little bit about what's going on here today. So, I wrote a script which is absolutely wild. But, I love to yap. I thought, let's have some organized yap. So I broke my script down into intro, check. I'll tell you a little bit about me, a little bit how I connect to chaotic, why I decided to do this, and then we'll go into episode summary, analysis, lore, then just other notes that I have, fun facts, etc. And then I'll close us out. So that's the plan. Let's see how it goes. So, we'll be talking about chaotic, of course, we all know. Hopefully, this series is welcomes newcomers, but also it's, we're going to connect things that maybe you only connect on the second time around. But the TV series, Chaotic, of course, ran from 2006 to 2010, and it's a cartoon or a TV series, if you will, that's based on a trading card game that is based on a trading card game, Chaotic Now or Never. And right now, you can watch Chaotic on YouTube for free, or you can watch season 1 on Amazon Prime Video, if you will. And so I've been watching on Amazon Prime because I've noticed that on the YouTube, they have, like, in the commercial breaks, they have the da 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 kind of thing, and that gets real repetitive. And you can just press the button on your keyboard to skip ahead 10 seconds to skip that, but on Prime Video they like edited those out. So that's kind of fun. You get to choose your experience. But a little bit about myself. So hello, my name is Jason, and so describing myself in high school terms is like theater kid, band kid, general nerd. I like to describe myself and my interests as superheroes and musicals. And so what that means is I was a theater major in college. Who's who's surprised? Raise your hand. Um, but theater major in college, so I look at the show more through a narrative analysis lens and how the story's being built. I'm kind of fascinated by story structure, and I almost became a media production major. That didn't happen. But, so we have kind of that media lens, we have the storytelling lens, and then like superheroes. I love lore. Um, I appreciate the music and how it intertwines with the magic. That may be the band kid in me, but like I like the lore. I'm fascinated about the world of Param, and in Chaotic, there's like three different worlds, and that's one thing that I love about Chaotic is I saw this post that was like the media that gets the most fan fiction, stay with me, is not the media that is like the most objectively good. It's not the most poignant art. It's not the most artful art, but it's the art that has the biggest toolbox. It's the art with the best world building. And that's how I feel about Chaotic. I think it has such a fascinating toolbox and world to just play in, and that was great for me as a kid, still great for me as an adult, clearly. But, Chaotic has these three different worlds. It has the real world with the card game, the online game, and we spend a little bit of time there in the TV show. Then you have the world of Chaotic, which is fantasy competition wrestling, if you will. It's like the equivalent of sports, but in cartoon form. Crazy. And then you have Param, which is like geopolitics in a cartoon. And so you just have a lot of levels to play with. I've seen this TV show at least twice in my adult life, and I really engage with this material from the TV show. I like our DVR used to be filled with chaotic episodes. I swear we had 50 on there. And I refused to delete them. Those were my babies. If you touched a chaotic episode, Jason was upset. But I love the cartoon, and also I love the art style of the cards. I think that really drew me in. And studio art major. So again, that it all connects to who I am today. I think I never really played the game as chaotic because I had nobody to play with. So sad. Nobody wanted to play chaotic with me. Crazy. We survived. Trust. But I am aware of how the card game works, and like strategy and collecting is all an aspect to this world. I more so focus on the story and what that has to tell us. Of course, I might sprinkle in a few card facts here and there, but maybe that's for you to tell me. Maybe you got to tell me about like how this all connects to the card game. So that's a fun little back and forth we have going. That's a little bit about me, how I connect to chaotic. I truly love it. It's a crime how much I do. Senior year of college, I lived in a house and I made PowerPoints with the chaotic cards and their corresponding college majors. And I presented that to my roommates. I really did. And so, like, what a fun time. It's embedded in my psyche, chaotic is. So, with that, let's dive into these first two episodes. Now, I have to say, these first two episodes, going into this, I was like, dang, I really have to watch the first two episodes. I normally skip the first two episodes. When I do a rewatch, I like start with episode 3. But I sat down, I watched these first two episodes, and so here is a summary of what happens. So Tom is playing chaotic in the cafeteria at school, and then he's like playing online and he gets his code to chaotic. Kaz, thrilled. With some convincing, he uses the code and he like splits his personality, and his real world self gets instantly mad and tosses his scanner. And then he gets transported to Chaotic. At Chaotic, he figures out game mechanics, and he's put into his first match. That's where the episode breaks. When episode 2 comes back, he wins his first battle, and then Clay messes with him and makes him transport to Lake Kenepo. This is where he meets Sarah and learns about the dangers of Param. Eventually, Kaz and Tom find his scanner, and he is able to return home and, get his memories back. That's my cute little summary of these two episodes. Um, Also, okay, so a pet peeve of mine in like analysis videos like this is when they just like tell you like they're analyzing, but they're actually just telling you the plot, and you're like, you're not actually doing any analysis, you're just telling me the plot. And so that's something I'm gonna strive for is you've seen the episode, hopefully. You're smart, hopefully. You remember, hopefully. Um, so I'm gonna try not like I'm gonna give you that summary just so you know what we're talking about. But when I do my analysis, I'm trying not to go chronological. I'm trying not to just tell you about what you just saw. I'm trying to go a little bit deeper than that. So, section 1, analysis. Um, the point of this like episode, of course, it's a pilot episode. Um, and I'm saying one episode even though it's two episodes because it is one episode. It's Welcome to Chaotic Part 1 and 2. So, I'm grouping them together as one. But the point of this episode is exposition. And oh boy, do they have a lot of ground to cover. They have to explain so much because the lore of Chaotic just runs deep. They have to explain the 3 layers of Chaotic: the real world, there's Chaotic, and then there's Param. And the episode is kind of broken up in that way structurally. We start in the real world, then we're transported to Chaotic, and then we learn about Param. And then they also have to introduce us to our characters, which they actually don't fully do. They just introduce us to 3 out of our 4, which that's fine. Peyton gets his own episode. Love him. But so they introduce us to our characters and kind of what their roles are in this series and who we expect them to be. So we get Tom, and right away, Tom is like our protagonist. He is hot-headed, temperamental, and quick to judge. These now, I, Jason Luck, am a certified Tom hater. I just have to say it. I have to get it out of the way. I love Tom. And like Chaotic would not be the show it is without Tom. But I am a certified Tom hater. He is hot-headed, temperamental, and quick to judge. Oh my gosh. And let's talk about that because he he gets on my nerves. But we established that right away. Like he immediately throws his scanner away. He says, "This thing doesn't work. Trash." We'll circle back to that. Right. But then they also established that he's quick to help, he's a good friend. He has kind of a if they help us, we help them attitude. And that comes up with Mesmar, like, Mesmar helped us, we have to help him. And Sarah is like, you are going to die. Like, but he's like, I don't care about the consequences. I have to help my friend because he helped me. Right. So we established that's kind of Tom's character is hot-headed, temperamental, quick to judge. Let's say it a third time. Hot-headed, temperamental, quick to judge, but also quick to help. He's easy to make a friend. He's nice, he's kind. He stands up for what's right, etc. And then we have Gaz, who they really like we don't really establish much about Kaz except he's Tom's best friend and he's kind of a nerd, right? They have this moment in the trash yard, the junkyard, where he finds the spaceship toy and he's like, "This spaceship toy." And he's like, "Yay!" And Tom is like, "Let me throw that real quick." But it just like all they really establish with him is he's kind of a nerd and he's a little eager in the real world about his passion and love for Chaotic, which aren't we all? But that's kind of what they establish. They're like, he's a friend and he's kind of a nerd. And then we have Sarah. And what we establish about Sarah is that she's kind of a scan quester. We find her in Param on a scan quest, and that's where we continue to see her throughout the show. Um, the other thing they establish with her is that she is friends with Clay's enemies, which is kind of a common theme. Like, our group is just like, we hate Clay, let's be friends. And isn't that how the real world works? Isn't that how the real world works? No further comments. Um, but she's like, oh, Clay did something bad to you? Let's be friends, I'll help you out. And so we get some noble qualities from her, right? So we establish the characters, and we also have to do exposition on like how the battle drums work. And you have to use your creature and your battle gear and your music and your location. And you have to tap into the creature in order to be successful in the battle drum. You know, you have to figure out how to use attacks and whatnot. And then finally, they establish Param is a real place. It's a real place, it has real consequences, and also it like intertwines with the game. So truly they had a lot to cover in this episode. And that's why it's part one, part two. They got a lot to cover in exposition. And as a whole, this episode, it introduces a lot of things just like on the surface, but it doesn't go very deep into the explanation of anything. It doesn't really show you about the inner workings, which I do think is smart to a certain extent because you don't want to overwhelm your audience with like, this is a bunch of lore, this is a very complicated world, and we're doing complicated things. You want them to know, like, this is the world. They kind of show us, like, there are a lot of rules that they go in depth later are present in this world right now. Like they introduce Sarah goes, "Oh, I deleted my one scan to get another scan," right? And that's not something they're establishing. That's a rule of this world that is in place, but they don't like explain that your scanner can only hold one card at a time, one card of one type. They don't go into that explanation, but they do. That rule like is present. Another thing, so we have Tom as our fish out of water character, and so he is meant to like Tom is meant to be used as a narrative tool to get the audience to learn about things as he learns about things in real time. This is Tom's first time in Chaotic, and so people are telling him like, "Hey, this is how things work." And so through that dialogue, we as the audience members are also learning, "Oh, hey, that's how things work." Like Tom is going through it at like he's going through things the first time as the audience is also going through things the first time. And so him being this fish out of water gives us a cool narrative tool to help the audience get exposition. And Tom is kind of the voice of skepticism in these episodes. He is so unwilling to believe that chaotic is real. And so as he's confronted with the reality of his situation, he is also used as a tool for the audience to suspend their disbelief. He he's like, "Wow, I'm at Chaotic. It is real." And so the audience is like, "Yeah, it is real." There are some other moments where he's like, "Dang, this is crazy." And like with the with the he's like, "I'm in a mascot suit. Where's the zipper?" Right? And that goes to show the audience like, "Oh, it's not a mascot suit. Like he's transformed into the character." But like that's a moment of his disbelief that helps the audience suspend their own. And then one thing I want to point out in my analysis is this episode is framed as a frame story. So we open the episode with this kind of artsy, like we get some long pans of glacier plains. We get some like silhouetted footsteps. We get some like grunts from the characters before they're like actually introduced. And then we get the most earnest voiceover that like this is what people parody. Tom goes, "Let me back this up a little," you know, and that's, fine. Like they're using this narrative device like earnestly, and that's fun and, whimsical, if you will. But it's just so funny because the frame story of how did I get here? Let's let's back things up. Let me show you how I woke up. And they like get out of bed. They don't do that, but like it's just something that's so prevalent in parody culture is the frame story, and I just think it's so funny that it's used earnestly here. But what I think is interesting is they never close the frame. They introduce us like we start in the battle and then they back us up and they show us how he got there, but they never give us that moment of, and this is how I got to this moment. Like, and this is where you caught me, like, this is where you first met me. Like, let's continue on the story. They just kind of naturally and organically tell the story once they back it up. And you get those moments of, oh yeah, this is what I saw earlier to parallel, but you never get that Tom voiceover that's like, and we're back here. Like they just tell the story, and I appreciate that. The next thing is this more artistic drawn out opening is actually used as a hook. Like the frame story is used to hook your audience in. They start the story at like this moment of tension and intrigue, and like it's not close to the climax, is it? Let's think about this. Is it close to the climax? Like they start near the climax of the story, and with this tension and suspense, and then they rewind us and be like, now let's talk about it. And they use this artistic moment to build suspense. But I also do think that the reason why I typically skip these episodes is because they're just paced slower than the rest of the series. Like the long pans, the artistic opening. It's interesting. Like it's a good hook, but it's just different than the series going forward. And I find the slower pacing of this episode to be kind of grating to some extent. Um, like there's pros and cons because like the pros are the slower pace because the point of this episode is exposition and just to like info dump on you. The slower pace really breaks up the informational transfer in a way that is digestible to a new audience member. But like to somebody who's seen it, boring, boring. We get slow narrative arcs, and it's more like these episodes are more about information than about emotion. And that's kind of why I don't vibe with these episodes as much, is because there's actually like not that many emotional arcs. Let's go character by character. Tom, he's our put in character, he's our fish out of water. We get his perspective, right? And he's the one with the narrative arc. He goes from disbelief to understanding. He goes from like I don't believe in chaotic to actually this is a pretty cool place. So that's an arc we get. He also goes from outrage to acceptance of like like that's the B plot of my scanner, I just tossed that because it's broken. And actually, nah, this is a pretty cool place. So we get that narrative arc. And I guess Sam Shady gets a narrative arc if he goes from like confidence to defeat, you know? But that's pretty much all we get. Kaz has none, Sarah has none, Nadrin has none. I think maybe you could argue that like Nauthilax and Mesmar have an arc because they like are in a battle and we have a winner there. Um, and then also Clay has none. He just shows up and attempts murder, and we don't get a resolution on that. So actually, let's talk about our two villains of these episodes. One, Sam Shady. That is such a fun name. That's all I want to say about him really, is his name, Sam Shady. The like having Shady in his name really alludes to the fact that he's like the villain of the episode. Um, so I just think it's a fun naming device. And then Clay, he just shows up and attempts murder. Like truly, it is outrageous. It is truly outrageous. Can we talk about that? This is it's crazy. He gets a cameo in episode one where he like notices that like, oh, Tom could be a good player. He wins his first match ever. But he doesn't talk, and then in episode two they finally decide to pay the voice actor, and give him some lines. But in episode two, he talks to Tom and immediately says the exact opposite information of what Kaz told him. Kaz is like, everything's fine. You just have to wait. And then Clay shows up and is like, hey, buddy, everything is not fine. Let me murder you. Murder. I'm going to say it again. Let me murder you. He's so crazy. And so we don't fully get an explanation of why in this episode. Like, this is a thing where they just kind of gloss over like Clay is here and he's bad. He attempted murder. But they don't really go in depth about his motivations of why. Um, there's no there's no justification of why he's crazy. Like it's just zany and wild. He just shows up and like creates a problem. And that's kind of iconic for him actually. There's no further narrative explanation. It's just a complication in Tom's story of returning home. Um, and like it has a narrative structural point of Clay messing with Tom justifies why we get to explain that Param is a real place because he sends him to Lake Kenepo in Param and we meet Sarah and you know plot ensues. But he's really just used as a narrative device. And let me elaborate on what I mean by he just shows up and tries to murder Tom. His so Clay's thinking in this moment is here's a potential good player, right? And we know that Clay, his intentions are I want to be a good chaotic player and I do that by taking out the competition, right? His motivation is I want to be good at this game. And that's easier for me if I have less competition, right? And so he's what he does instead of like raiding instead of raiding Tom's deck and like trying to steal his good card of Maxor, which clearly good card right away. Talk about that. Um, we don't talk about that. Anyways, instead of like trying to raid his deck and then zooting him to Param, he just immediately goes, "Hey, let's take you to Param." And Sarah says, like, he probably sent you here hoping that you wouldn't figure out how to get back. And that is true. That was his plan. He sent him to Lake Kenepo hoping that he would get stuck. And he kind of did. I mean, he got lucky with Sarah there. But, like, what would happen if he got stuck? He wouldn't have food. He wouldn't have water. He would just die. Like, or he would, like, run into a creature and get hurt. Like, there's so many dangers in Param. There's so many dangers in Param. And he just sent him there with no explanation, no way to get back. I'm sure Tom's smart and he would figure it out somehow. Or he would get mad and instantly throw his scanner away. Don't get me started. But Clay, he, he's just so zany and wild. Um, and tries to, like, that's like his intention may not have been, let me murder Tom, let me stab him with a knife, right? But his actions lead to Tom getting hurt and therefore being taken out of the competition. And what does that mean? It means that he's unable to come back. And you're like, you get it. You get where I'm going with this. I've spent enough time on Clay and his murder. But what I think is interesting is like there's really no subplot in episode one and two. Like it's all focused on Tom. We get Tom at home, and the main plot is Tom at Chaotic, right? We do get the subplot of Tom. like Tom's real self trying to find the scanner and get him home is the subplot. Like if we're thinking about it, we have A plot, B plot. The B plot is real Tom trying to get his scanner back. But I think it's so emulsified with the actual plot that it really is just one plot. Like we have two versions of Tom, but it all is just Tom. It all drives one central story, which sure. And I think that's interesting. Also, the central conflict of these episodes are we have this man versus man of like, we have that's it's a pretty common theme in Chaotic because it is fantasy wrestling, man versus man, um, Tom versus Sam Shady. But then once they resolve that, the new conflict is Tom getting stuck, and how he resolves that is like Kaz going back and finding his scanner. And the plot of Tom at Lake Kenepo is really just biding time. Like it's really just him learning and waiting, right? He's just learning and waiting. While real Tom has to solve his problems. So that's fun. And that's it for the analysis section of my script. So let's move into lore, right? We actually have a lot to talk about in lore because, like, that's what this episode is about. This episode is about giving information. And we get a bunch of information, but it also raises some questions. And the first thing we learn is what is chaotic? How do we get to chaotic? So we learn that, like, in the mechanics of the world, you have to be good at chaotic on the online version. Like, you have to be good enough to be considered special to get a code. How good do you have to be at online chaotic? Unspecified. This is a question. How good do you have to be at online chaotic to get a code to come to chaotic? Right? Is it like is it like the battle drones where you have 7 wins? I think it has to be much harder than that. So you have to be an unspecified amount of good of online chaotic in order to get into real chaotic. And then you get a code that lasts for 1 day, which you would think 1 day means 24 hours, but they really imply that 1 day means until midnight. And so Tom gets his code at like, let's say 11 a.m. He's in school, it's lunchtime. But they imply that his code expires at midnight, and that's like 13 hours. That's like a 12-hour code. And I think the people of Chaotic just get no grace. And what if you're busy? What if you're in school? What if, like, I don't know, what if you're witnessing the birth of your child and you just don't have time to put in your online code in 12 hours? You know what I mean? So, outrage. But you would think, okay, you have 24 hours, you have 12 hours to put in your code. Um, and then your first match is 3 minutes after you show up. Um, So maybe your code lasts until your first match is scheduled, but how do you know when your first match is scheduled if you just have a code? Right? There's just some there's just some world building mechanics that are kind of fuzzy. If it is until your first match is scheduled, like, well, let's circle back to that actually. But then so you get your code, you're granted admission, and you have to be one, good at the game, and you have to be two, type your code into the scanner. These are your barriers to entry to get into the world of chaotic. It's not like Harry Potter where you just get a letter and you're like, yippee, I'm going to school. You have to have skill, right? And then you have to not miss your window of opportunity. So you have to one, be skilled, and two, be a little bit lucky. So that's fun. And then we have to talk about your scanner because right, you type your code into your scanner. What if you don't have a scanner? Like, how in this world, how do you get a scanner? This is my question. Is it like an iPhone where like just like everybody has a cell phone, everybody has a scanner? Or is it like only nerds have scanners, right? Like I'm a chaotic player, I play with cards. Does it come with the cards? Like I know in real life they sold like scanner shaped tins. So is it like that? Like, oh, I bought some cards and I also get this piece of electrical equipment. Or or is it like just something you have to buy separately? You're like, oh, like I'm logged into the online game and let me purchase a scanner, right? And that shows your commitment to the craft. That's how you have to be one good and two you have to be committed because you are dedicated enough to own a scanner, right? And like how much does it cost? We'll talk about that too. But like that's it's just crazy. And I kind of see what's actually crazy is the iPhone was released after the Chaotic cartoon was released. And so I kind of view the scanner as this kind of form of retrofuturism where Chaotic, like, obviously, like, it can do FaceTime, it can do tracking, maps, and all this stuff, which is like what an iPhone can do. And like, we're really on the verge of that. And it is a physical let me say that one more time. It is a physical manifestation of a narrative plot. Like, cell phones already exist, but having the person come up on the screen is like a good narrative way to showcase that somebody is calling, right? And so I think it is a natural progression, but in some way it like predicted this technology. And so now that technology has progressed past the point of like the iPhone 1 and like now we're, 20 years later. Are we 20 years? Yeah, we're 20 years later, right? And technology can do all these other things and we have AI chatbots or whatever, right? Looking back at like, oh, this is what they predicted technology would be able to do is like robot waiters and like being able to FaceTime somebody. I just think it's an interesting way of looking back at a predicted future, right? But some ways we have caught up to this. Like scanners really do function in the way that an iPhone does. Like they use FaceTime, they have maps, they have tracking, right? And I'm sure we like Pokemon Go, you can scan your creature. Don't get me started on Pokemon Go. But anyways, right, so it's just, you know, like what are these scanners and how do you get one? That's the biggest question that I think is raised from these first two episodes is what if he got a code and he didn't have a scanner? Right? How like that's something that's never really explained. It's just understand as a truth of this world that like if you play chaotic, you have a scanner. And so, right, let's accept that truth. Let's take this moment and hold space for the acceptance of scanners in our fictional world. Okay, thank you. So now, what's unique about this first episode is this also has to do with scanners. Kaz calls Tom because like Tom is setting up his deck, and calls Tom, and Tom does not pick up the video, right? So we have video calls here, but this is a moment in our canon where normally when you call somebody in real life or on a scanner, you call them and it rings, and then you like click your little button, and then you have a call, right? These are the steps and actions that take place. But we like canonically in this first episode have Kaz just shows up. He like and it kind of startles Tom, right? He calls him and he just shows up. And like that may be for narrative reasons. Like it's a realism versus naturalism thing. Realism being like it's realistic to the natural world, right? But naturalism being like it is so realistic that it like actually reflects. Like naturalism would be boring in this point of like Tom would be startled by the call and then has to decide to pick it up and then we in the story we don't need to see him be startled by the call and pick it up. We can just move the story along with like Cash shows up and he's startled and we skip that couple of seconds that would be boring for the audience member, right? So we can justify it that way. But if it is, if that is something that can just happen, why is there spyware on every single scanner in the universe? Like, if you just call somebody and it just shows you them, that is spyware. Like, you know what I mean? You can just watch somebody, and I don't think that's justified or okay. And so I think this might be something that we have to keep an eye out for as we continue to watch the series is when they make calls, do they answer or do they just show up? Um, and continuing on this scanner train, we also learn that your online deck and your scanner stop working in the real world when your consciousness is in chaotic, because your deck is in use in chaotic. And so they justify it that way of like, oh, it looks like your scanner is broken because you're actually using your deck in chaotic, which, fair enough, honestly. Like, that is a good explanation. I think it justifies enough, right? But this leads to the question of one, Cass knows this happens, right? It happens to Kaz regularly because he regularly goes to Chaotic and tells Tom about his adventures. And if they are best friends in the real world, you know what I mean? If they are best friends, one, why would Kaz have not told Tom this before? And two, Tom is such a hothead. I'm a Tom hater. Um, well, like Tom is such a hothead that he instantly throws his scanner away. And so that begs the question to me, how expensive is a scanner? If you like the only thing I would do this with in the real world maybe is like if I got like a toy from McDonald's and it didn't work, sure maybe I'd toss it. But you're not going to take a moment, you're not going to take a breath and like try it again. You're not going to try again, you're not going to reset, not going to just see if you can fix it. Tom is so irrational that he's like, "Oh, this thing's broken. Trash. Out the window." Like it truly infuriates me that Tom is so infuriated. It's just something I had to bring up, right? And so it begs the question of like how expensive is a scanner? If it is the price of a real iPhone, like if we are equivalating, that's not a word. If we are equivocating the scanner to an iPhone in the real world, like I would never, like nobody would ever do that to their iPhone. It's so expensive that you go to the Apple store, you call up Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile. I don't care. You call them up, you say, "Hey, my phone is not working. You better fix it now, please. You better fix it now." You should not even go on chaotic.com and be like, "My scanner's working, Reddit thread, like how do I fix it?" And then they'd be like, "Actually, you're in chaotic." Right? So, I think that the lower question it brings up to me is, we got the question of, okay, one, how do you get a scanner? And two, how expensive are they? Because if this is junk, it justifies why Tom is like, oh, throw that away, and he'll just go buy a new one. But if it's not junk, I think it narratively justifies more that like Tom is this irrational character. And then the final thing we learn about the scanner is that so your deck is locked until the button flashes red and you click it and then you like download your chaotic consciousness into your real body. And I think that's how I justify it, right? I see they never really justify like why there's two versions of yourself. Um, Kaz has this line that's like Tom is like, "How does that happen?" And Kaz is like, "How'd they get the cream in the cupcake?" And I may have misheard that, but I don't think I did. He says, "How do they get the cream in the cupcake?" And if that is not the funniest justification a series has ever had of like, I'm like they're like, I'm not gonna explain this to apps. Like actually, just how they get the cream in the cupcake, nobody knows. And the thing is, Kaz, one, we do know how they get a cream in the cupcake. If you have a cupcake that's filled, it's one, a piping bag. You take a little spoon, you take out the middle, you take a piping bag and you put cream in it, and then you like frost the top. It's not that complicated. Just watch Cake Wars or something. Like, I assure you, you'll figure it out. But two, most cupcakes do not have cream in them. Why? How'd they get in the cream in the cupcake? They didn't. Like, they don't put cream in the cupcake. The majority of cupcakes are not a filled delicacy. You know what I mean? Like you don't fill a cupcake. You have your cake and then you have icing on top. And if you're fancy, you like break off the bottom and turn it into an ice cream sandwich and a cupcake sandwich, an icing sandwich, if you will. Right? It's just like Kaz, what are you talking about? Like literally what are you talking about? How do they get the cream in a cupcake? It's crazy. It's so crazy. And but like how I since the series refuses to justify like how they put the cream in the cupcake, how you have two versions of yourself, I kind of justify it with the technology motif. And I'm sure you noticed me using this language of like he downloaded his consciousness. That's kind of what I think happens if I have to speculate, which I will. What I think happens is when your scanner, like chaotic, is like the physical manifestation of the online game. And so what your scanner does is it like duplicates your consciousness and puts you into this like manifestation of the game and like even more so param, right? And then that's what happens when you transport back is you're actually just like downloading your memories. Because if you die in param, you don't die in the real world, just like your avatar dies. And so your real world self never gets to download your memories of like and so really the consequence is you don't get the memories of your final adventures. And I do think this maybe cheapens the stakes at some points in the show of like, when the stakes are death, right? It's like, okay, you're actually not going to die. You're just killing like you're just killing the avatar version of yourself. Real world you is fine, and like what's like they can just never play chaotic again online. You can still play with the cards, or maybe you can make a new account. Call me crazy. You'd have to rebuild your deck, but like it's like you can never go back to chaotic, and you'll never get your memories of your final adventure. Which, if you want the memory of how you died in the lava pond, all the power to you. But I like I said, I think it cheapens the stakes at some points because the stakes aren't life or death. It's life or, you know, losing losing your treasured hobby, right? Which who's to say that that's not worse than death? Like, okay, I know that sounded crazy, but like it's the stakes are grief, like you're losing your passion, your joy, you're losing an outlet for adventure, an outlet for physical activity, you're losing like this aspect of your life. And so the real consequence of that is grief of like, oh, hey, I am, losing this aspect of my life that I can never go back, right? And what is that? Like when you're in your real life, you're, oh, I can never go back. That's a form of grief. But it is like later on in the show, it's like, life or death. It's not actually life or death, right? But those stakes are there. So that's just something I was thinking about. Okay, that's all I have to say about scanners and like the lore that they reveal in this first episode, I swear. So let's actually move on to let's circle back to the orientation system at Chaotic, which I think is interesting because there's actually none. There's no chaotic orientation, which I think is crazy. Being like a former orientation leader myself, it's so crazy. They just show up and your first battle, like Tom's first battle is in 3 minutes. He shows up and he one gets a sassy robot. um, First of all, what is this robot's deal? He's like, "You're a newbie. Feel bad." Like, absolutely crazy. This is our introduction to the robot waiters. Like, he instantly roasts Tom. He's like, "Oh, you're in boxers, womp womp." Crazy. So his first battle is in 3 minutes, and they kind of allude to like there's a bunch of newbies that joined on the specific day. So that question, like that makes you wonder, like, are there certain initiation days where like they send out codes once a month or they send out codes once a year, and you have to be one of the best players online at the time in order to get that code. Like that's an interesting way of how people get into chaotic, but there's no explanation or there's no orientation. And you think that they would teach you about like param, they would teach you about transportation and porting and scanning and how there's a game behind the game. But no, they immediately throw you into your fantasy wrestling league, right? And with an experienced player. And I think that's crazy too. An experienced player who is also LARPing, might I add. Sam Shady is in, he's in the Battle Drum LARPing. And one, good for him. Like, you know, this could be his live action D&D, if you will. But he is really in character as Takinam. And honestly, don't get me started about Sam LARPing in the arena. But I just think it's something worth noting. So the real question is, why are they not putting like two new players up against each other? And then you can kind of start like this bracket ranking of like, oh, one win, one loss, like winners against winners, losers against losers. And then, you can pair people up against skill level. And here's the thing. Sure, these players are good at the card game and they like understand the game mechanics of the card game, but it's different in the battle drum. You do not get a tutorial on how to like channel your inner Maxor, how to do a rock wave. It's just curious. It's just curious is what it is. And so what like it's ha ha ha. It's one curious. And two, if I'm going to chaotic, I am absolutely pulling up and I'm making some sort of orientation system. You pull up, you go to like you get a PowerPoint at least, and then sure, you get like, and this can be a 3 minute PowerPoint and then instantly into your first match. If that's what you want, so sure. So true. I don't care. But we have to have some sort of orientation system. I promise you, it would make things better. It would just make things better. Narratively, sure, maybe not. Like because like like for a TV show, you can't just sit down and be like, this is how the world works. But for the players, like I'm talking about lore, in this world building world, I just think it would be beneficial. And so we can circle back to Tom puts in his code and his first match is in 3 minutes. And so yeah, maybe the code expires when your first match starts, but like that wouldn't make like if there was an like maybe there was an orientation and Tom just missed it because he was so hesitant on putting his code in that like maybe if he put his code in right away, okay, you split your consciousness goes through an orientation, then he has 10 hours to explore chaotic before his and understand how the world works before his first match. Maybe that happened. Like maybe that happened and they just didn't tell us. They didn't go, "Oh, Tom, you're so late. You have your first match. You missed orientation. Oh well, you just got to go in." Right? We don't get that moment. But also, they don't tell the new players that their matches are broadcast across the whole common area. We have this moment where Tom says, "Geez, that was embarrassing. I'm glad nobody saw that." And then instantly, when he comes out of his match, he goes, "Kaz, did you see what I did? I won. I won." And I think that's we get some conflicting information there. Maybe Tom's smart. Maybe he figured that out. Um, but I just think like what if you wanted to like what if it's your first battle and you didn't know it was broadcast? That's embarrassing. I'm sure. I'm sure it is because I'm sure most of the like new players lose because they're put up against like established players. Anyways, that is my rant on that. Just other lore I have written down. They tell us 7 battle drones run by a codemaster each, so we have 7 codemasters. We get the robot waiters, and we get that they do have milkshakes. They have snacks. Fun. We get introduction to Sarah, who gives us a tutorial on like how to scan creatures in Param. So thank you, Sarah, for being our tutorial master there. And then we kind of establish Param is dangerous. We also This is lore, actually. We established that Tom went to ballet camp, which, okay, embarrassing for him. Whatever. People dance. Tom, it's not embarrassing. We've all been to a summer camp that was, you know, maybe not what we wanted to do in life. Right? You tried ballet. I'm so proud of you. You were brave. Maybe you didn't like it. That's okay. It's okay you didn't like ballet. But the ballet actually will make you a better chaotic player because ballet is strength training, it's coordination, it's agility, and you need all of that for the drum, Tom. I'm speaking directly to you, Tom. You need all those things. And so maybe it's actually a good thing that you went to ballet camp, and maybe that justifies why you're a good chaotic player because you have ballet training and you're strong and agile. We also established that he's like a good shot because when he takes that little truck from the junkyard and throws it and it hits his scanner, like that's good aim. And that's another quality that would be beneficial in the battle drum. Like I promise you it is. The final thing that I have in lore is it's interesting. Sarah notes when Nadrin uses music that she goes, "Wow, a real musician." And Tom says, "That's not how it happened in my battle." And Tom, that's true. It is different than how that happened in your battle. Because in your battle, we kind of have the motif of technology versus in Param, we kind of have the motif of like nature and naturalism. Not naturalism, but nature, I'll say. And this is something that I don't actually think they go to explain all that much, but I want to, during this rewatch, I want to keep an eye out for how music works, how musicians work, and like all that lore, because it is different. And I think maybe that's something they wanted to explain later in the Musician's Arch storyline that got cut short when the show got canceled. Um, but it's just interesting to point out, and I want to know more. And so that's it for our lore section. Next up, fun facts and other things to note. I wrote down random aspect ratio changes to zoom in around the eyes. That's dramatic. It happens. Kind of a narrative storytelling device, media production thing. Fun. It creates drama and shows you that the character is really thinking. In the cafeteria, they use a pay-in animation puppet with different hair for an extra. And they also do the same thing with Sarah. They use the Sarah animation puppet just with different haircut in the like background to fill the crowds. And so keep an eye out. Peyton happens in the cafeteria, and Sarah happens in Chaotic, but then they also put the real Peyton in the crowd of Chaotic. So just to keep an eye out for those cute little cameos. And these are both before they introduce the real characters of Sarah and Peyton. So I think they justify it with like you wouldn't know what these characters look like anyways, so here's just a different version of them. But like I'm pretty sure they don't do it again once they actually introduce the real characters because then you'll recognize them. You'll be like that's Sarah with different hair. Let's see. I thought it was funny and realistic when they call Kaz a freak, total freak in the cafeteria. Because imagine being a high school student, like, and being, this fantasy world is real, I swear. Like, that's true. People would think you're weird, and they do. And they do in this world. But I think the utilization of the word freak is really of the time because I was doing a Ben 10 rewatch of the original Ben 10 series, and they love a freakazoid, you know, mega freak. Like they just love the word freak. And so I think maybe the lingo terminology of freak is something that is just of the time. It's of the early 2000s media, and it's just, I don't know, it's just funny to me that they used that. And also something that's like of the time when they go, dude, I know, which is good writing because they use it twice and they use it as a callback. And, it shows consistency between Tom in the chaotic version and Tom in his real life world person. But that's also one thing where they go, dude, that's also a very specific type of like lingo terminology that they attribute to these characters that I just think it's funny. I think it's interesting. And then I think what I'll close this out on is the Tom and boxers. So Tom wears this is fun fact, Tom wears cherry boxers in the first two episodes. And that's funny, I guess. It's comedy. But so this show came out in 2006 and I was young. Probably saw this when I was 4 or 5. And so my scandalous little anecdote is I thought that it was so scandalous when I saw Tom in his underwear. Like, as a child, I was like, he's practically naked. Like, that is so like, that is so edgy and just, I just thought it was so crazy and wild and didn't make me want to keep watching. Yeah, sure, maybe. Being a little 4-year-old, 5-year-old, being, this is cutting edge material. They have a character in boxers. He's, you know, like that is so revealing. And watching it now, like, or even like when I watched it in high school or like watching it now, I'm like, that is the most like covered up version of underwear that anybody could wear. Like, he's not even wearing underwear. He's essentially wearing like patterned shorts. He's wearing like the graphic tee equivalent of shorts. And it's like not scandalous even a little bit. He's so covered up. All you can see is his knees. Like, I don't know. So I just thought that was funny and I thought I would share and maybe embarrass myself a little bit with that anecdote. Thank you for going on this journey with me. I'll just wrap things up. Episode 1 and 2, they really give you just a taste. Just a little taste of the world. They introduce everything. It doesn't go too deep. It's no like Glee pilot, which is regarded as one of the best pilots in TV history. But, it's definitely, they do the thing. Honestly, episode 1 was better than I remembered, pacing wise. I think episode 2 is really what gets me. And like, I love Sarah, don't get me wrong. But they conclude a storyline and then they just like sit and wait while Tom figures out how to get home. And it doesn't do much for me, episode 2. That's what I think. If you saw anything I missed or want to add, let me know in the comments. Yes, this is me in my influencer era. Let me know in the comments down there. There are definitely things I want to talk about in the future, like me being a Tom hater. But like the animation style, character designs, theme song. There's more things I want to touch on, and maybe I will, actually. But if there's things that I didn't touch on that you want me to touch on, let me know. And thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.